This is my 5th day out here in the hangar. Probably about 3 solid days of work and a bunch of other tasks to perform. Lots of holes to drill, wires to pull. Welcome to episode 36. One of the things I needed to get done was installing a bunch of stuff on the firewall while I had the engine off. So this is my firewall, pretty much ready to reinstall the engine. I have finally worked out everything for the fuel filter. I'm going to have this fitting right here is where the fuel comes from, the fuel selector valve on the other side of the firewall into the filter, 180 degrees. This is going to be a flex hose or aluminum. I may replace this with aluminum. We'll see when I get there. But anyway, all these holes are drilled. This hole was drilled. I drilled mounted for the MGL RDAC engine monitoring system, battery contactor, starter contactor, and a forest of tabs. I don't have it yet, but I'm going to mount an identical one on the other side. And just to celebrate my success, I routed the ground wires from the fuel pumps to the forest of tabs. My battery is going to be on the other side of the firewall. And so before I left to go to work last time, I had sent my fuel servo off to Airflow Performance to have the direction of rotation of the mixture flipped around. Then I changed the position of both these. This is the throttle arm and that mixture so that it's got a good range of motion relative to the direction I'm going to have the cables come from. So since this is back, I installed the adapter which houses the fuel injector nozzles. There's a O-ring that Brett machined into the base of that, so all I had to do was torque that down. There's a gasket between the elbow and the adapter, so that's in, that's torqued. There's another gasket between the elbow and the throttle servo, so that's been tightened down and cotter keyed. So this is all completed and ready to go back on. And so here's my crazy list of stuff. It just keeps expanding. Every time I cross something off, I find 3 more things to add on. See the stab trim sensor, I have the wires connected to the sensor. I've not installed the sensor yet because I need to hook up the stab trim motor to power and make sure that it's in the right position before I can position the stab trim sensor. The wiring is routed for the stab trim motor and those connections are all made. Relief is provided. Static ports, I still have to do that. I just got that stuff out this morning. I have never got back to making the transponder antenna base, but that's going to be pretty straightforward. The fuel servo, of course, that is reinstalled. The fuel pumps are installed, and at least those ground wires are connected. I still need to work on the positive side. COM antenna base is drilled and installed. And this set of monkey bars only pertains to the Series 5, where you have to put in this piece of, theirs is brick formed. I had both the brick formed and a piece of extrusion. I used the extrusion. This steel plate, I drilled it and made sure that the COM antenna would mount here. It's all riveted in place, ready to go. Primered because the fabric comes up to the back of it. The fuel lines I need to fabricate and install, obviously. I'm waiting for a set of those vice jaws that you put the AN fittings in so it doesn't screw them up. Oil lines, I still need to order those, cut and install them. The oil tank mount, I was working on my SolidWorks design. I kind of got distracted by doing other stuff, so I need to finish that, and I already have a guy who's going to make that for me. Avionics mounting plate, I had that cardboard plate mocked up behind the seat. This is the cardboard version, which I have had in there for quite a while, just waiting to see if I had to change anything. And one thing, that once I actually hooked up the wiring harnesses, I had these RS-232 plugs pointing that direction. It got super busy in here, but all I had to do was flip these over, point them the other way, and that cleaned things up. Yesterday I fabricated this out of aluminum, 40 thou. Used neighbor's shear press brake combination contraption. Actually worked pretty good. So I just put on some return flanges to stiffen it up, and because it could, I'm going to transfer all these hole locations to this and mount it. The battery, I still have to select which one I'm going to use and buy it and then mount it. I already know where it's going to go. The battery contactor is mounted, starter contactor is mounted. I have to order the ground straps, which I'm going to use on the firewall forward side. And see the ELT wiring, I've got some of that done. The safety trim for the stab trim Motor, I have a fabricated mount and it is installed. The MGL RDAC is mounted, Force tabs is mounted. And just this morning while I was looking at the rudder pedals and I was ready to put the engine back on, I decided it would be a lot easier if I installed all those brake lines that go between the brake master cylinders with the firewall off. So I kind of stopped to do that. This is the mount I made for the safety trim. The RS-232 connector 15 pin is pointed down, and the adjuster screw is on the inside where it's reachable. These are the wires for the stab trim motor that are going to come to the safety trim. I had originally followed a suggestion to use some garden irrigation hose, which is nice and light. It's polyethylene, but the piece I have is super coily and I couldn't warm it up enough to straighten it out. So I went back and I got this piece of PEX tubing, which is working perfectly. And I just have it zip tied in place until I get some lacing cord, then I'll replace the zip ties. The headset jacks are up here, just tentatively routed. I need to make some adapter plates for those. I did pull out the header tank so I could complete the install of the aluminum flange and the rubber hose, and I had lost my sealant, so I had to buy another tube of that. So I have the sump drain is installed in there, ready to go. This is the switch for the ELT, the mysterious red button, just 2 leads. So I made this up, and it's got plenty of wire so I can route that back to the ELT. I need to pick up a 3rd wire, which is the GPS location, and I'm going to have all 3 of my GPS antennas mounted on a shelf, which is going right here. And the Sky FX, which is for the Echo UAT, is going to provide that GPS signal, so I'll have to patch that in with this harness on the way back. It's the brake reservoir installed per the instructions for the Lycoming and Continental, because that's the parts I had. I used the factory fittings and plastic hoses. Everything's installed per the 2-pedal diagram, other than the last 2, because I don't have enough hose to get from the brake pedals to the wheels. Only had about 2 extra feet, so these are just finger tight. I just kind of was playing with the routing of how they're going to go down the middle and then out to the right and left wheels. So now I'm going to slap the firewall back on here and test out that theory about running a tube from here through the grommet to the forward side of the firewall, where it'd be easier to service. So here's that brake reservoir. I could run the line up through here. Trying to figure out if a straight fitting off of here or an elbow would be better. I have both, so I'll try them out and just poke it through there and figure out what to do on this end. I could end up with some kind of a motorcycle reservoir on this side so I can see the fluid level. So this would be more like a buffer than the actual reservoir. All right, so now I have the engine back on here and hopefully it's going to stay. This morning I watched a couple YouTube videos and became an expert on how to make fuel hoses. I made this one. I made this 4AN hose that goes from the servo into the injector housing. Then I did this one, which gets me from the fuel fitting, the bulkhead fitting into the filter. I used this 180-degree fitting and it kind of worked, but actually works about as well as my camera angle here, which is to say not that great. It's actually touching this. It's actually touching this tube, which is no good. And before I forget, I do have to come back and put fire sleeve on these. But what I'm going to do is use a piece of aluminum tube, and this is 5/16, so I need 3/8. So I was just practicing around with this, but I make basically a trombone slide that's going to attach with a nut and ferrule to this fitting, and then either go above or below or up this way or something, and then go back down to a shorter hose, piece of flex line, and then into the pumps. On this side, there's another angle of that coming out of the servo, 90-degree -4AN, and this is the 180-degree turn that I made to come from the pumps into the straight fitting, and I did end up using the straight fitting. This is okay, other than it touches this, so I'm probably going to end up with an Adele clamp to hold it off. And then I put on the adapter plate that gets me the ability to mount this intake. K&N filter is secured. I flipped this bell crank over so that this will give me a good angle to run a cable. Previously I mentioned I got a taller one of these. Let's see if I can find that real quick. And so this would work just fine the way it is, but since they offer a taller one, I'm going to replace it. It's going to get me above this nut, and that will enable me to get a perfect angle on this. So I'll replace that when I come back. And then also, as long as I had their website open and was burning my credit card up, I got 2 of these anodized fittings, which are used for the throttle cable and then also the mixture cable. So I'm going to end up making some kind of a bracket out here. So I did just a quick test fit of the coil packs. This will be the busy area. The one on the other side's got lots of room. It's probably one of the first things I installed on here. And of course, now that everything else has been populated, I need to re-verify that I don't need to move it around, but it looks like in pretty much the exact location I had them before, it's going to work. So when I get those attached where they're going to live, I'm going to get out the spark plug wires, which have to be trimmed to length, and route those everywhere. And the last thing I'll be able to get done before I head for work is to finish installing the comm radio transponder and the Echo UAT onto this plate I made. All right, well, that's going to have to do it for this time. Did get quite a bit done. My whiteboard list is still expanding. I have some more brake hose, brake lines on the way, some fittings. I'm going to order some 4-gauge wire that's pre-crimped on both ends to go from my battery to the battery contactor, starter contactor, and from there to the starter. Order at least 1 ground strap that I know of, possibly a second, almost certainly a second. I need to order some 3/8 aluminum tube. I did play with the piece of aluminum tube I had, which I thought was 3/8, but it's 5/16. So I was able to test fit the idea, and so it's going to work to replace this U-shaped fitting right here. And assuming I have any off time on this shift, I will use it to work my SolidWorks design for the oil tank mount, and I need to order some, I think it's AeroQuip 303 hose for the oil lines, and need to order some fire sleeve, but I won't have time to measure that up, so that'll be next time when I see brake hose. Anyway, lots of stuff. See you next time. Thanks for watching. Yeah, this is going to be a messy edit because I've shot a lot of video, but I've done part of it when the camera wasn't actually on or the battery was dead, and it's going to seem out of sequence, so hopefully I can put something together. Thanks for your patience. We'll see you later.